All right, I thought I'd take a second to give you some feedback on what I heard and what I read in the Desmos activity that we did today. I thought it was helpful. It helps me understand my practice. I think it helps me learn about you guys a little bit. I think it's a good thing to do just to like remember that we are all got some things that are frustrating to us and some things that we're learning about. Everybody's been pushed a little bit outside of their comfort zone this year. And when that happens, it's very important to take some time to reflect. Um, and I think that um, for me, one of the things that I thought would be interesting about when we started doing this was like maybe I could give you guys a response, and I could also picture myself talking to an audience of educators. Like I think there's really a lot of opportunities to do things that are designed for multiple audiences at the same time, and that we really are in a unique time and place to be hands-on studying communication and how we reform schools in ways that meet the needs of our students. And we sort of just have to stay engaged with that process and understand that the the hurdles that we overcome and the things that force us to be to that try to the reasons we use to check out, we got to overcome that. We got to stay checked in and stay engaged in it. And with this particular class, like I've never had a class of AP Calc BC students who were also, I think we're connected in ways that we weren't before with Discord. I think there's like just people that are working overtime to create learning resources for you guys. Like there, even though we're not in a physical classroom, the atmosphere that we have in this class does feel special to me. And we are going to be coming down on this crucial stretch where a lot of it is going to be about preparing for the AP class or AP test. But if we can also think about document our experiences in some way, who knows? Maybe we have experiences that other classes could benefit from. Um, One of the things that I know as a teacher we don't get as many opportunities to do this year is kind of have a space where we can discuss the world or discuss things that kind of naturally pop into our head. Or for me, it's like talking about the things that I've recently read about. And it's like the things that teachers teachers do love their subject a lot of times. And I do teach because I like calculus and derivatives and differential equations and slope fields and all that kind of stuff. But what I really like about the profession is that it gives me an opportunity to get to know my students, and it also gives me a chance to help students understand the world. And often it is through that subject matter. But those times when you can go on tangents and get really charged up about something and I'm spitting on the people that are sitting in the front row, those are fewer and further between. But I will say that two topics that interest me that I've read about recently are this one called scale invariance, which is or scale independence, and the idea of fractals, the idea that things look similar at different when viewed at different scales. And you can look at this picture on fractals and think about it, but there's all these different types of things that exhibit this property of scale invariance. And I think we've constructed a lot of schools of thought around this topic of the normal distribution, which a lot of things are normally distributed, but sometimes we tend to view everything as normally distributed. And people have specifically one person I know of, Nassim Taleb, who's been able to exploit through his hedge fund. He's like a financial wizard. This idea that people have it wrong in that we view everything through the lens of a normal distribution. We severely underestimate the likelihood of black swan events, and um, it's a topic that I think is clearly relevant, and it'll be relevant going into the future. And it doesn't come up in high school mathematics a lot, but um, one area where I see it, I think scale invariance is the reason why metaphors are the basic way that we communicate. Like things exhibit the same properties when viewed through at different scales. Um, like if we start talking about systems and communication, well, like a lot of the same things that you're going to see in our national political, social, economic system might be the same in our school system. They might be the same, similar to other types of systems, and a lot of them I think are the same, even in your own head, in your own mindset, or within your family. Like to me, this scale invariance has applications that deal with psychology and emotions that have been unexplored. A book that I recently read was called The Math Gene, which was cool. And it was about how mathematical thinking has evolved and sort of the basic, well, I don't know what there's lots of different things. The book talks a lot about human evolution and linguistics. And this idea that there was like proto language, and proto language is like just there maybe were like 35 different sounds that they weren't really people, they were different species then, but made. And then eventually they enabled the ability to connect different syllables. And that's what we call language is when you're connecting syllables. And I've always thought one of the interesting things about language, like if you discovered a temple in the middle of the woods somewhere, you'd have a little bit of an archive of every brick that went into it. But with language, like when we talk about recorded history, like language was fully evolved by the time we ever started recording anything. So we have no idea how it came to be the way it is. It's all purely speculation. But when he talks about linguistics, he talks about this thing called offline thinking. What he calls it offline thinking is, I guess the way I explain it is like if you think about a mouse or a rat, and you put a piece of cheese in front of that rat can kind of like taste that cheese, even without putting its tongue on that cheese. So that's a little bit of an abstract thought. And not all organisms have that ability. And if you take that cheese away from the rat, it may still be able to picture it because that impression stays in its brain for a little bit. But what people can do that other animals or mammals can't do is we don't even need you to put that cheese in front of us in the first place. Like you can think about it. We have a word that represents cheese that looks and smells nothing like cheese, but still you can kind of think about it. That's what he calls offline thinking. That's what I think we mean by abstract thought. He speculates that this was an advantage back in the day when people, or whatever we called them, needed to hunt in groups and they needed to like execute a group strategy. Probably not that much unlike a football team does in the Super Bowl, but they needed to, they needed to be thinking about what the other members of their team were thinking about. And that's where he says offline thinking gave us an advantage. And he says that that ability to think abstractly is what allowed us to acquire language, which is the same thing that allows us to use math, to use letters to represent objects or numbers and see patterns and things. And the one thing that's interesting about language is that everybody learns it, but math, there's various levels of how fluent people feel they are. And so his speculation is a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is an emotional piece. I mean, I think there's an emotional piece to language too, but there's an emotional piece to math that has to do with the classroom or the school or the environment that it's taught in, where if you don't get it, it's frustrating and it makes you feel bad about yourself. And so what his speculation is that something about this math gene or like the ability to mathematics somewhat has to do with maybe how you respond to that feeling. I don't want to make it seem overly simplified. I think that there's like 100 different complex factors that go into this, but there is definitely an emotional attachment to math. And I think you all in this class are people that have taken well to math, and other academics, I think, too. Like you guys sort of absorb content very well. And so in some sense, your students that thrive in school is the way they've evolved. I was talking to my high school baseball coach recently about his philosophies on teaching. He's also a teacher, and he says something about you have to coach your worst player as much as you coach your best player. And he talks about, we've also talked about how schools don't really coach either our worst or our best players that great. Like a lot of times, I think you could listen to the conversations Stephen and Dennis and I have had and realize that, like, our best, quote unquote, best players don't really feel like school's hitting them where they're at all the time. And I think it's because it's overly content driven. But I think one thing I want to say is that, you guys are the ones who thrive in school, and a lot of this feedback you'll see are finding ways to thrive in this setting that we're in too. And I just think that it's important to know that you guys are going to be in positions of leadership and in positions to change things that structurally need changing systemically. And this experience that you're going through is going to help inform your lens as you go through those positions. It's the people that it's the students that are that have a tougher time absorbing content in like naturally. I'm not guaranteeing that they're going to be in positions to change the system, but I think for you guys, I think you are, and I want you to keep in mind that you got to change. You got to keep them in mind when you're trying to enact change too. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Is the first question is, what's your opinion towards rolling backpacks? Or I think I said, should they be banned? And I never knew that this was kind of a uniting topic. This is something that I just remember last year. I had a class that never wanted to talk about anything, and somebody brought up this topic, and then all of a sudden they were talking, and then I was like, Jesus, like I had didn't even think this student that brought it up had any way of talking. Like I just had to realize that it took me a long time to get to the point where I wanted students to talk about something off topic, and I had found a lot of ways to like become of this mindset where I understood what students wanted to talk about. And then it occurred to me that I have no idea. Like, it's been so long since I've been a student. I don't even remember rolling backpacks. I don't walk around when all you guys are walking around. And I've like kind of, my brain has evolved in a way that thinks I know what it's like to be a student, but I really don't. It's been a long time. And I had to, I think I, as a teacher, tried to create my craft around like challenging those, like that's confirmation bias. But I think it's important to recognize that um, that confirmation bias is something that we all have that will grow in you as you get older, especially if you don't question it. So the role as far as rolling backpacks, I don't have that strong of an opinion on them. I thought they create an environment of bullying and scapegoating in a small minority. Backpacks themselves are dangerous for people walking near them, and they take up a much larger space. I think there's probably like metaphors you could make towards that. I do think this year you should be learning about yourself as a learner. I do think that that's something that colleges focus on better than high schools. High schools need to do better about teaching you how to learn as a learner. And you guys are already good learners, and you're, I think, oftentimes reflective. So this is interesting. I love watching videos and listening to podcasts and audio recordings. It keeps me focused and helps me grasp more information. I have learned that I learn better remotely than in person since I have the freedom to learn on my own time in a comfortable environment. I'm a lot less of an independent learner than I thought I was. I realized even though I know how to successfully find ways to study that work for me, I work much better with interaction with my peers and teachers to stay motivated. I learn best by doing, not listening. I think that's true. I think as we go through this next decade, they're going to, for people that are kind of still curious and still interested in learning, the world is your oyster, because like this like podcast audio recordings type thing, like I just think that there's going to be so many interesting people talking about so many interesting things and doing it in so many interesting ways that like probably merge podcasts and videos and digital editing and all this different kind of stuff. Like I expect it to be kind of fun for people that are engaged in that. This one was, I think, what we can learn as schools. Teachers should try to engage with the students more rather than lecturing. If they lecture too long, it becomes boring and we become disinterested. Sorry, buddy, because I'm about to talk at you for like 10 more minutes. I've probably already been going for 15. I think that distance learning has pushed us to be more creative when working in groups. I think this is something schools can learn, how important it actually is to have in-person school, not for the work, but for the other stuff that comes with interacting from your peers. I think that's a very big lesson. And I also think you can sort of think about where we've come as a culture due to social media because of the same thing. Like, I think you guys have all been raised with social media. Seeing that somebody liked your post has a like a hormonal reaction in your brain. I think that like it sends an endorphin. And so I think that this year has taught us that we need more social interaction. And I think we should extend it to, you know, what are effective ways to use social media, and what are ways that are toxic that we use it. But this was my favorite part. You can talk while the teacher is talking. I actually love this in like meetings that I'm in and things, like the chat window when it's all kind of a one-way flow of information, gives you a way to interact when you don't want to speak. But I find that for me to stay engaged in things, oftentimes there has to be it has to feel a little bit interactive, and that part is probably my favorite thing about Zoom. Um, there should be more homework that encourages students to get outside. My history class made us take a photo of us doing our work outside. Um, I think that's a cool one. I'll try to think of something cool for that. Sleeping in makes distance learning better because we don't have to go to class physically, but there's also limitation of student interaction, which is sad. The sleeping in part, I feel like I'm convinced like we're going to go back, and I don't know when, but I mean, when we do go back, things will return to some sense of normalcy. They'll be different, but some sense of normalcy, and we'll appreciate a lot of things that we had taken for granted before this. But we'll also miss sleeping in, and there'll be like, oh yeah, distance learning wasn't that much fun, but oh man, do I miss getting up 5 minutes before class started. You'll never, I don't know if you'll ever have that opportunity again. Hardest part of distance learning, lack of social interaction was something I had to adapt to. The hardest part was definitely the internet technical issues I faced. It made online exams very stressful and oftentimes frustrated me because it meant there were no other forms of communication with my teachers. Trying to find extra practice or areas to review past concepts, missing out on the general banter and conversations in table groups. Criticism for schools, at least for high schools, give more autonomy for students to learn on their own. The grading system, I guess I would say listen to students, but since students are diverse, you would just have to make decisions based on the support behind it, and the best choice for school's future. It makes you aim for grades, but not understanding or mastery. I feel all that. I mean, it's tough when you feel like, you're beholden to a system that you don't really agree with. That's what I feel like as a teacher. It's the grading system that I would say specifically. There's only so much I can do. But I do think that's a topic. Like how does a lot of times we just sort of when something has been around so long, we just kind of take it as the right way. I think that's called the status quo bias. But our grading system, our 100-point scale system, the fact that 60 of those points describe failure, that we've set up a system where, if you're wrong more than 10% of the time, you really don't feel successful. But yet we say make mistakes. I think that's a topic that needs to be explored. We don't have time to in this class, but it's something I'm always down to talk about more. Criticism for this class, I like that you guys gave me some. I personally think that there should be more opportunities to discuss challenging homework problems on outside platforms or in class. This class is perfectly fine as it is. I feel like we could go a bit faster, and this class is mainly taken up by just work. The only engaging part is at the beginning. After the beginning of the class, we just finish our work, and then there's not much else to do. I think that having more classes, lecture days where we learn about the concepts and equations before using them in assignments and tests would be helpful, since we don't do that too often at the moment. I wish there were more in-class discussions on confusing math concepts. It's hard to balance all those things. I think I said at the beginning of this, like I'm in this profession because I want that interaction with my students. I don't feel like you guys need to be learning as much calculus at the pace that we're learning at it to be, to have power and control in your lives and in your futures. However, I do feel like you signed up for an AP Calc BC class, so it would be narcissistic of me to think that my job was to teach you about the world when what you want is to be prepared for the AP Calc BC test. So I try to walk that line. I think that no, realistically, there is just a ton of content for you guys to learn, and we have set up I think a way to ask questions that's helpful. I think one of the things that we could maybe do a little more of is having a choice. Do you want to be in your groups working on this work, or do you want to be in a larger group? And I don't know. That's something to think about going forward. There's a lot of constraints that work. This is just how systems evolve. Like I think systems evolve so that it would be hard for me to to teach less content and teach things that are more interactive. And there's ways that have to do with the curriculum. There's ways that have to do with the co-teaching. There's ways that, just have to do with parents and the criticism I'd receive if we went off topic more often. But I'm interested in learning more about how we can make all those different ends meet and still feel prepared in a couple months for the AP test. Mental health is a very big topic. I think it's one of those things that oftentimes we talk about, but because we don't know how to do much about it, sometimes it feels like what we say about it is not in alignment or directly opposed to what we want to do about it. Which I think is what this is. We talk about it a lot, but I don't think we talk about the cause of it as much. Maybe just giving more opportunities for mindfulness and more information about that. I agree there should be more explanations of root causes of mental health, but I understand it's very difficult to do. My take on mental health is that it's complex. And I think a lot of it has to do with identity. Like, I know I suffered from anxiety, and mine wasn't really about school. Like, I don't think I put a ton of pressure on myself over school for whatever reason, but then again, I am just a high school teacher at this point. So for me, I know that it was like a body image type thing. Like I didn't get over it until I was probably in my 20s. Like I just felt not happy with the way I saw myself through other people's eyes. And that kind of prevented me from saying anything that meant something to me. I think it was partly to do with my body image and the fact that vulnerability wasn't a thing that was taught to me in the environment growing up. And I think that second piece about the vulnerability being not taught to you still is very real. To me, that mental health piece, a lot of it has to do with expressing what it is that's inside you that's trying to come out. And we as a community and as adults aren't very good at walking that tight, or at providing spaces that make it comfortable and safe for you to say what's on your mind. I also think that there's like an enormous amount of pressure to, it's to look good on a college application. And that's unfair. The way we've reduced in a teenager's life to a college application really is unfair. And I think a lot of kids go to college and end up kind of realizing that where you went to college wasn't as big of a deal as it felt. And then there's a little bit of anger and there's a little bit of resentment. It's like, why did I spend this time worrying so much about it? And why didn't I learn about things that are bigger issues? And I think that's sort of a typical experience at college that many of you guys may go through. But I would just say that a lot of the mental health comes from pressure that comes from social structures, but a lot of it times comes from a personal place too. So if you can remind yourself that wherever you go to college, you are going to have opportunities, and it does not matter where you go or what you study or what you know about your future now. Kind of all that matters right now is you keep in mind what it is you're interested in, what it is you're passionate about, and learn about how you respond to setbacks. Shout outs. There were a lot of shout outs. Enoch and Rita, Rohan Vishal, Dhruvi, Richard Gia, Dennis Chen for lending me his helpful AMC worksheets, whole breakout room, Kibu, Manusha, Charlie, Olivia. And I think there were more that I didn't include, but there were a lot of shout outs. And I think the reminder about mental health is that positive energy is very important. And sometimes communication gets, feedback loops get corroded. And one thing you can do to improve somebody else's mental health a lot of times is respond to an email or just kind of do something that seems spontaneous or feels unanticipated and thank them for something, or to like respond, like engage in something someone else wants you to engage in, and then that kind of is one of those cycles that that passes itself on. All right, thanks for listening. This had nothing to do with you. This is just me needing to pretend that other people are listening to me while I ramble on for 20 some odd minutes. but it has been very therapeutic. And I'll talk to you soon.